Welcome everyone to my channel ECON101. Today we will discuss about Cardinal Utility approach, which is a very important topic in microeconomics. When we talk about consumer theory, we always talk about indifference curve, utility function, etc. But before we move to the concept of indifference curve, how we can rank different consumption bundle according to the preference, we should also discuss about what Cardinal Utility approach is. So Cardinal Utility approach was there. It was developed by the believers of marginalism. There were certain marginal economists who were supporting the idea of cardinal utility. And the question is, who were they? These marginalists were Jevons, Marshall, and Walras. Yes, I'm discussing some of the names. Marshall, you will learn about Marshallian demand curve. Walras law is a very important law in general equilibrium. So yes, this marginalist economist, they were the supporters of Cardinal Utility approach. Now the question is, what actually Cardinal Utility approach is? When we consume different commodities, we get satisfaction from that consumption. And that satisfaction is termed as utility. Now, according to this marginalist economist, utility can actually be measured. That is the satisfaction level that a consumer is getting from the consumption of a certain commodity, that can be measured. So, according to this approach, utility can be measured. But how? So it can be measured in terms of utils. So utils is an unit which helps us to measure the utility or satisfaction level of a consumer. Or we can measure it in monetary terms. The price that we are paying to consume a certain commodity, that helps us to measure the utility that we are getting out of it. Now, there are different assumptions when we talk about cardinal utility. For example, the rational consumer. A consumer has to be rational because his objective should be to maximize the utility level. We are also assuming that the marginal utility that a consumer is getting remains constant when the utility is measured in monetary terms. And in equilibrium, marginal utility of a certain commodity is equal to the price level. These are the assumptions that we are making. Now, before I move to the diagram, I will quickly show you how to get to the equilibrium point, right? Okay, so let us consider that a rational consumer is consuming X commodity, and the utility that he is getting from the consumption of the good is given by U. And this utility can also be measured in monetary terms. Now, what is the price of good X? Price of good X is Px per unit. So what is his utility? Utility is given as U. U is a function of X. And X here is a good commodity. So as the consumption of X increases, his utility increases as well. And what is his expenditure? His expenditure is Px into X. That is the price that he is paying for consumption. Now, what would the consumer do here? The consumer would try to maximize this utility from the consumption level, and we will solve this utility maximization problem. So what will be the first order condition? The first order condition is du dx minus px, which is equal to 0, of course. Du dx is equal to px. We can write it as mux equal to px. Now, some of you may have the question that why du dx is equal to px, mux, right? Why am I writing is as mux? So du dx actually shows the additional utility or the additional satisfaction that the consumer can have by consuming one additional unit of the commodity. So the change in the utility due to consumption of one additional unit of the commodity, that's what we are calling here the marginal utility of the commodity. And as you can see, marginal utility of the commodity is equal to the price level. And we know that the price level in a period remains the same, it's constant or it's given. As a result, we can observe marginal utility of the commodity also remains constant. So that is the cardinal utility approach is about. We can also show it with the help of a diagram as well. Now that we have the equilibrium condition here, we have found out that the utility that a consumer is getting, the additional utility that the consumer is getting from consuming one additional unit is equal to actually the additional unit of money that he is spending for consuming one additional unit, which is again price of the commodity. Now we can also derive the demand based on the diminishing marginal utility. Let us see how. First of all, we have to draw the total utility curve. You know that U is a function of X, right? So we have to draw the total utility curve here. What will be the shape of total utility curve? As the consumption of X increases, total utility increases. However, it increases as diminishing rate, as you can see. And at X bar, the utility level is maximum and then it starts falling. Again, it falls at a decreasing rate. So you can see from here, the slope of the utility curve is negative. At this point, it is falling, and here also it is falling. The slope is falling throughout, but after X bar, the slope is actually negative because total utility is falling. Now, the marginal utility is nothing but the slope of the total utility, right? Because we are considering additional utility here. So, up to X bar, marginal utility is of course positive up to X bar, but as total utility is increasing at a decreasing rate, the slope is falling. So it will fall and become 0 at X bar because that's where the total utility is maximum. After that, it will be negative because here total utility is actually falling. That is how we are deriving the total utility curve and marginal utility curve. Now, in this figure 2, this was figure 1, suppose. Here we will see how from the marginal utility curve we can actually derive the demand curve for X. So suppose the consumer is consuming X1 amount of the commodity and the marginal utility of the commodity is mu1 then. As the consumer consumes X2 unit, his consumption increases, marginal utility is mu2. When he is consuming X3 amount, his marginal utility is mu3. So the negative section of the marginal utility curve is not important because we will only consider the positive portion of the marginal utility curve where it is equal to demand curve. Now we know that marginal utility is equal to price level. So at mu1, price of the commodity is P1, at mu2 it is P2, and at mu3 it is P3. So if we rightly draw them, this is P1, this is P2, and this is P3 for X1, X2, and X3, right? So at this point, and this point, let us join them. This is nothing but the demand curve for X. This downward sloping curve is showing the demand curve for X. Clearly you can see that we have derived the demand curve for commodity X from the marginal utility curve. So we have, in short, discussed about the cardinal utility approach. I hope the session has been useful for you. It has been helpful for you. If it is helpful, don't forget to like this whole session and subscribe to my channel. Thank you, everyone.